This video is a continuation of the introduction video and is on form and function. It covers material from chapter 33, the animal body, basic form and function from the OpenStax textbook, and also from module 1, structure and function, the Chiaris book. We talked in the last video about organ systems, and we went over the main function of the 11 different organ systems found within the human body. The one thing that we didn't talk about is how these organ systems are almost all involved in the process of homeostasis. Homeostasis is the state of internal constancy, and organisms use homeostasis to maintain a steady state or internal balance regardless of what's going on in the external environment. In humans, body temperature, blood pH, glucose concentration are all maintained at a constant level. Homeostasis is a process that's vital to the survival of cells, tissues, and organs. The homeostatic mechanisms in the body are controlled by something called negative feedback loops, and we're going to talk about that. The basic definition of what a negative feedback loop is when the buildup of an end product of some type of system will come and shut the system itself off. There's a couple of different things that you need in order to make this happen. Sensors are something that detect change, and effectors are something that make adjustments. So in this picture here in the diagram, you have some type of environmental change, and that environmental change is detected by a sensor. That sensor sends information to something that's called a regulatory center. The regulatory center then sends information to the effector, and remember, effectors are what makes the adjustments, leading to a reversal of whatever it is, whatever system needed to be changed. The classic non-living example of negative feedback is temperature regulation in the control of a room temperature. So let's say we set the room temperature at 20 degrees Celsius. If the room temperature increases, there will be some type of stimulus, that is the actual temperature, that the temperature is increasing. And the sensor and control center do a couple of things. The sensor would be the thermostat, and it would send an information to the control center to turn the heater off. In response to that, the heating will drop or stop, and the room temperature will decrease. The sort of converse of that is if the temperature continues to decrease too far, then the sensor control center will detect that, turn the thermostat on, now heating starts, and the room temperature will increase. And this is a constantly looping system. Another example of a negative feedback loop is with blood sugar levels. So let's say you consumed and digested this lovely looking pizza here. When you eat and consume food, it will cause your blood glucose levels to rise. In response to higher glucose levels, the pancreas is going to secrete insulin into the blood. In response to that higher insulin level, the glucose is now transported into the cells and liver cells and stored as glycogen. This causes blood glucose levels to drop. In response to a lower concentration of glucose, the pancreas will then stop secreting insulin. So here you have a stimulus, which is the blood glucose level, and that blood glucose level then causes the pancreas, which is now the effector, to release insulin into the blood. That causes glucose to be taken out of the blood, and then in response to a lower concentration of glucose, now there is no more insulin being secreted from the pancreas. So this is a classic example of a negative feedback loop. There is such a thing as a positive feedback loop, and the best example in the human body is the birth of an infant. This is the result of positive feedback. So here you have, and you can start anywhere in this process, but let's start at the top. So you have the baby pushing against the cervix, which causes it to stretch. That stretching of the cervix causes nerve impulses to be sent to the brain. The brain then will receive those impulses and release oxytocin. Oxytocin causes the uterus to contract, which causes the baby to push against the cervix even more. And then the stretching of the cervix, blah, 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 it continues, more oxytocin until the baby is born, and so that is an example of a positive feedback loop. Just to sort of bring it back to the temperature regulation example, you can think of that as a very similar process happening within the human body. So the body is able to regulate temperature in response to signals from the nervous system. So here you can have normal body temperature. If the body temperature starts to rise, then a bunch of different things happen. Blood vessels will dilate. That causes heat loss to the environment. Sweat glands begin to secrete fluid, and when that fluid evaporates on the skin, heat is lost from the body. That causes heat to be lost to the environment, returning to normal body temperature. If the body temperature falls, it's sort of in the opposite. Now blood vessels will constrict so that heat is conserved. Sweat glands are not secreting fluid, and even shivering, which is involuntary contraction of the muscles, will cause heat generation, which will help to warm the body, bringing back to normal body temperatures. Just that now is a good time to kind of mention, if we're talking about this homeostatic control and these rhythms and loop within the body, to mention that there are physiological processes that fluctuate normally and do so in very particular ways. We call these circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms are natural body rhythms that are linked to a 24-hour day-night cycle. These rhythms are all controlled biologically by the brain, although they can be affected by things like light and mood. So here in this picture, we're looking at variation in core body temperature and melatonin concentration in the blood. And the point is, there are times of the day where your body temperature is greater, typically in the afternoon, early evening, and times in the day where your body temperature is lower, typically in the very early morning. And there are also times in the day where your melatonin concentration is pretty low. That's usually in the afternoon and evening, and melatonin will rise pretty greatly in the middle of the night. These are physiological processes that fluctuate in very predictable ways. In fact, there are a bunch of different things that are considered to be part of the human circadian rhythm. Heart rate is dependent on time of day, body temperature, blood pressure, reaction time, muscle strength, all of these things have very particular rhythms, and we consider those human circadian rhythms. Finally, just to end all of this, I just wanted to have a bit of a summary. So homeostasis will detect changes in some type of internal variables. That detection is made because there's been a stimulus to say that something has changed. The stimulus is detected by the sensor or receptor that will then send information to a control center. That control center will then cause the response or the effector to help the body return to that homeostatic state. And that is the end.